Hello, welcome to Notes and Queries, a programme in which we'll be seeking serious answers to stupid questions, silly answers to sensible questions, but quite often just finding questionable answers to unanswerable questions. The notes, the queries, the questions and the answers have come from people in all walks of life, from teachers and pupils, experts and sexpots, professional academics and Hamilton academicals. And the sort of question which we might address are: who was Bob in Bob's Your Uncle? What makes glass transparent? What happened to spangles? And why are dusters yellow? And helping me with my inquiries is Carol Vorderman, the thinking man's thinking woman.
Now, have you ever wondered why bagels have a hole in the middle, or how you can weigh your head, whether or not you can keep fit through sex alone, and what is the difference between a sport and a game? Stay with us through the series and you may or may not find out.
Yes, first though, mosquitoes. Why do they bite some people more than others? Do they bite some people more than others? And specifically, why is it always me? Now, does anybody here in the audience think they get bitten more than other people, more than their fair share? Anyone like to sort of risk holding their hands up? Well, about 4 of you. 5, maybe. There's no mosquitoes around. So how many people think they don't get enough? You know, they're mosquito biting. Now, I know a little bit about this subject from having listened to and having spoken to Professor Sir James Bimmant. Why do mosquitoes bite some people and not others?
Well, first of all, you have to distinguish that some people are very sensitive to bite, and some people don't notice being bitten. So
well, now, you're immediately going on to the thing I'm always told, because I get bitten a lot by mosquitoes, yes. And people will say this. Of course, the mosquitoes bite everybody. It's just you making a fuss, or your body making a fuss. No?
But it isn't true, because no. I can put my arm into a cage of hungry mosquitoes, and they won't look at me.
Yes. Well, let me tie you to the question. Then. Why is it? Yes. Why is it they'll bite some people and not others?
A mosquito will detect food. First of all, by heat in a distance. They have a thermal receptor. Yeah. They can also even detect a higher level of carbon dioxide in the air, which will tell you that something around is breathing.
Right.
And they will home in on this.
Yes.
But all insects have got a tremendously powerful sense of smell.
So you're saying that if a mosquito's biting me, it's because they like the smell of me, or I just smell like food?
I think that it's because they like the smell of you to start off. Yeah. I mean, that's the beginning of the process. Yeah. They may find that you're too thick-skinned, and they may then want to get to somebody who's got a thinner skin.
Or is it thickness of skin, then? Does that come into it? So somebody with a thin skin?
I think it must come into it in that females are far more commonly bitten, I think, than males. And certainly the mosquito isn't going to do any more work than it's got to get through to it. But I think it's very largely based on chemistry and smell, which is why it is that a good repellent will work so effectively in stopping mosquitoes from biting people, because they'll be put off by the smell long before they get to you.
Yes. Is there something you can eat, though, that would repel them, like having lots of garlic or taking, I don't know, strong tea or alcohol?
Well, it would repel me. I don't know whether it would repel a mosquito.
Well, I'm not worried about you biting me. I'm worried about the mosquito.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, that's the scientific view, but I just wonder if anybody here has got any experiences of mosquito biting and how to avoid it. I don't know if this section... Anybody here in this section of the audience has got a... Yes?
I found that if you eat Marmite for about 2 weeks before you go on holiday, it doesn't seem to bite you then.
What? Because you get so early you don't go on holiday at all.
It's come out when you sort of sweat, because you get hot and sweaty on holiday.
Yes. All right, well, that's a good advert for Marmite. If 2 weeks before you go away. Right. Anybody else got a better method than that, or a different... Yes,
They say if you have lots of vitamin B, mosquitoes don't like vitamin B, so you can drink beer. There's lots of vitamin B in that.
All right, hang on now. I'm already with you on...
And if that doesn't work, if you drink enough beer, it won't matter anyway.
You don't notice it, yes. So vitamin B, beer, with a bit of Marmite. There's a finger up there.
Well, this isn't much use to sort of people in general, but I've been on steroids for the last 5 years.
Right.
Regular steroids and...
Are you an athlete?
No, I'm not Ben Johnson.
Yes. No.
Proper steroids, and since then they haven't bitten me at all. Never looked at me.
Right, so steroids. So they're very worried about their urine samples, so they're... oh, that's exciting. Anyone else got a...
There's a theory that fair-skinned people only get bitten by is a fallacy, because I get bitten like it's going out of fashion, so, unfortunately. But there's a thing called limacol, which is a cologne of a sort. You can rub it on your skin. Again, it repels them because of the smell.
Limacol, yeah.
Limacol.
Yeah. But you're saying it's not just fair-skinned people that get...
It's not just fair-skinned
and
people, unfortunately not.
Well, that was always been my excuse, but there it is. We've enough there, I think, about bloodsuckers. Another question here for the audience, though, is has anyone here not been selected by a Reader's Digest to take part in a win-a-car competition? Anyone not been selected? You've never been selected. Oh, that's 3 or 4 of you now. Has anyone actually won a car in one of these Reader's Digest comments? Right, well, I'm sure there are some people. So another question here is, why do runner beans always climb in an anti-clockwise direction? One there for you, Carol.
Well, I suppose it depends where you grow them, but if you grow them north of the equator, then I would think that they go anti-clockwise because the sun moves from right to left in the northern hemisphere.
Oh, right. So they go the other way around in the southern hemisphere?
In Australia, I don't know, but I would expect so, but I'd stick to broccoli if I were you. Yeah.
Well, the next question is difficult even to say, but the question is, why do we say Oxford Street and not Oxford Street? I have with me here Professor John Wells, head of phonetics and linguistics at University College London. I was using that as an example as one of the many things where people put the stress in different places.
That's right, yes.
But is there a reason why we say Oxford Street in the way that we do?
Basically, no. If you look at...
Thank you. Let's clear that one up.
Basically, what we've got here is a noun plus noun compound, and most of these are early stressed, like we say library book or running shoes. But names of thoroughfares are an important category of exception.
Yes.
So for most of these we have end stress, like we say Oxford Avenue, Cambridge Circus, Trafalgar Square, and so on.
Yes.
But those with street are different. I don't know why, but we say Oxford Street, High Street, and so on.
Yes. Is there a difference with road? Is there the notion that if it was the Oxford Road or the Harrow Road, the road that goes to Harrow, you'd stress it differently there?
Well, yes, and clearly you can always override all of these if you want to draw particular attention to something. You know, it wasn't Trafalgar Square, that's when you're emphasising square, but you might say, well, it wasn't Trafalgar Square, it was Russell Square. That would be a special contrastive stress. We have to put that on one side and think what it would be if you're not drawing any special contrast.
Oh, yeah, sure enough. But when the word perhaps first comes into a language, like a dark room and becomes a dark room, which is just a familiar thing for you to...
That's right. As it becomes a proper compound, then it gets this early stress, a dark room.
Right.
And similarly, a greenhouse is rather different from a greenhouse.
Well, in word... Yes, I'm sure there is. Is there a particular rule that follows in words generally as to where we should, or where people place the stress?
In these compounds, generally speaking, as they become well-known, they get early stress. But there are these categories of exceptions, like these thoroughfares. I mean, similarly, if the first word says what a thing is made of, and the second is what it is, then you get, for example, paper plates, or rubber boots, or cherry pie. And again, that's... it's sort of made of cherries, you know. But again, there are exceptions, because orange juice is made of oranges, and yet we don't call it orange juice, we call it orange juice. We all of us have cake as an exception as well. You know, we don't say fruit cake, we say fruit cake.
Right. Now, what about words generally? There's a great controversies over, for example, the word controversy or controversy. People get wound up, really excited about where the stress should come in that word.
They do, yes.
Does it matter? Is there a ruling on this, or...?
I don't think it's terribly important, but people do get hot under the collar, so what I did was carry out a survey. And I asked nearly 300 people...
Or survey.
Oh, indeed. I asked nearly 300 people which they prefer out of controversy and controversy. My results were more or less half and half for that. But I think controversy is clearly on the increase.
Now, can I ask you about pronunciation generally? Because apart from stresses in words, there's things
vowels
like...
and consonants,
but as well, like a simple word like zebra or zebra.
That's right.
Now, is there a pattern emerging there still?
Well, yes, I asked people that question. I found there was an overwhelming majority in favour of zebra in England, in Britain, in fact. But it was... dependent on how old you were, because older people often preferred zebra, and the younger you were in my sample, the more likely you were to prefer zebra.
And what about something like envelope or envelope? I've known some people say envelope.
Well, that's right, yes. Again, there's a general drift towards envelope away from envelope.
Oh,
it's not so marked.
All right. I tend to say envelope.
Do you? Yes.
Perhaps it seems a bit sort of boring just to follow the spelling. So
well, that's right.
Like again and again. Some people go for again now.
Yes, I think somehow 20% preferred again.
Now, as an observer of these things, is that all you do, just observe, or are you prepared at any stage to sort of lay down what is the correct form, or is that completely
Well,
outmoded?
I don't really want to, but people will come to me because I'm a professor of phonetics and they say, what is the correct form?
Yeah.
So I have to have a view and I have to recommend one or the other. And where I found my sample was overwhelming in one direction, then I think it's incumbent on me really to recommend to foreign learners, you know, Japanese or Germans who want to know what they should do, I tell them what the majority of people do. But apart from that, I don't think it's wise to get too hot under the collar about pronunciation.
No. And even pronunciation, oddly enough, there's sort of a dispute about that.
A lot of people say pronunciation, that's right. They spell it wrong too, but I'm in favour of spelling it N-U-N and pronouncing it pronunciation.
Yes, all right, so you do lay down the law at least on that.
I do, yes.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Professor John Wells. Now, we go on to something which I think I can say is something completely different. What is the safest position to adopt in a plummeting lift? Now, we've got a question, is what is the best position to assume if trapped in a plummeting lift? Now, you're a bit of an expert on this, in the sense that you were once trapped in a plummeting lift and you've survived, so whatever you did must have had some benefit. Would you like to describe what happened to you and what happened?
Yes, I hope it will be helpful to people. It was an industrial lift in which I happened to be in the lift with 2 large containers full of chewing gum.
Right.
And so there wasn't much room in it.
No.
3 people, including the lift operator.
Yeah, and the chewing gum.
And the chewing gum. The lift simply gave a gurgle and then dropped like a stone. Everybody's worst nightmare. And we simply plummeted towards the pit at the bottom. And my legs were slightly flexed, so that when we actually struck the bottom, I didn't have my legs braced. And from what I understand subsequently, at least, it's not a good idea to brace your legs because, well, they may frankly be driven up into your abdomen, and I think that would be very unpleasant. But the other thing which I think is important, there are 2 other factors involved, or possibly 3, but 2 important ones are, first of all, the sheer terror. Secondly, the shortage of time. So any more elaborate stratagem for survival, you only have about 32 feet per second very few seconds. In my case, I would probably think the first impact was about 3 seconds, maybe 4.
So you're just lucky that your legs were a bit relaxed rather than braced?
Yes, I was leaning on top of the chewing gum, in fact. So I think because my legs were slightly bent.
It's handy to carry a few huge packs of chewing gum than to lean on if you're going to go into a lift.
No, I think just flex your legs.
Yeah, just flex.
If you're thinking of jumping up in the air...
Yeah, that's what people often say.
Yes, well, they're quite wrong because you don't have time for that. And anyway, if you did, you don't know when you're going to hit the bottom.
No.
So you might get it entirely wrong. Thirdly, if you've got time to think of something like that, you've already fallen far too far to survive.
You might just think in time to jump up, and you might... Maybe the theory is that if you're up in the air, then you've got a bit of slack to the system to take some of the impact. What happened when you hit the ground?
It was an enormous sense of relief, a tremendous crash. And I thought, very briefly, thank goodness it's all over. Unfortunately, it is not. And if anyone cares to look at the bottom of lift shafts, you will see, in my case, it was a series of springs designed to absorb the impact of a lift dropping. And in this case, the springs had the effect of propelling the lift back up the shaft. So you're then in a very strange and odd position of renewing the whole experience again.
How far does it go, though?
Almost as far as you've previously dropped, it seems like that. You then come to a moment at the top of your rise of sort of weightlessness.
Yes, that's the time to get out, if you can, of course.
You can't. And so you have to relive the whole thing again. It's an instant déjà vu. And after about 5 impacts, you finally come to rest if the lift is robust enough. And then you can worry about the next problem, which is how you're going to get out.
Did you manage to keep your legs nice and relaxed on each of the subsequent impacts?
I think so. But to tell you the truth, the terror factor is very important, and you can't think or know what you're doing. You're just holding on to anything at all.
And what happened to you? Were you badly injured as a result of this, or could you walk away from it?
No, I walked away from it. I scrabbled out over the top of the chewing gum.
Yeah. The chewing gum, I assume, was all right. It wasn't sort of chewed up by the whole experience.
The lift was a bit bulgy, frankly, and I simply shouted for help through the lattice gate. It's an open gate on the lift.
And what about the other guys who were in the lift with you?
They were on the floor, and I simply assumed that they were dead. And therefore, I didn't bother them.
No.
I suppose a sort of selfishness about terror really strikes one.
Did you inquire afterwards if they were dead, or...?
Oh, yes, they climbed out later.
Oh, fine.
I thought they'd simply fainted from terror.
Well, I'm sure it's made us all feel a lot safer. Now, Judas, of course, according to the Bible, received 30 pieces of silver for betraying Jesus. The question here is, what would the equivalent sum be today? Carol.
Well, at that time, the Romans were in charge, so it's likely that the pieces of silver passed over to Judas were, in fact, Roman denarii, and here they are. And did you know, by the way, that the D of LSD, the old pounds, shillings and pence, comes from denarii? It's an interesting little fact there. Now, just as we have pounds, pesetas and zlotys, sesterces, which was not a cure for a bladder disorder, it was, in fact, the coinage used in Judea at that time. Now, 30 Roman denarii was equivalent to 120 sesterces. Got it so far. Well, a legionnaire who was a bit of a well-paid dandy, he earned 900 sesterces per annum. And if we consider that his military equivalent today would probably be an upwardly thrusting junior officer, then he would be earning about £20,000. So 900 sesterces is £20,000. 120 sesterces is only about £2,500. So on this basis, that's what Judas would have received. But sadly, he'd probably have got more by selling his story to the Bethlehem Star.
Well, here's another question. What's the origin of the phrase, as sick as a parrot?
The phrase, as sick as a parrot, has its origins in Latin America. People smuggling parrots from South America into the United States would need to ensure that the birds were quiet as they passed American customs and quarantine people. So what they would do would be, at a selected point in Mexico, they would stop and they would binge the birds on tequila. So to make sure that after a relatively short period of high excitement, they would be sleeping it off as they passed the border and not alert the authorities. Now, this was great for the smugglers, but it wasn't so good for the parrots. About an hour later, they would come to with the mother and father of a hangover. And this queasiness has given our footballers the expression, as sick as a parrot.
Oh, no. Sick as a parrot is a corruption of the French sick as a Pierrot, and it refers to the French pantomime character with a long, miserable, gloomy face.
Right. Now, one of the big questions is there life after death? Well, there is on Notes and Queries, apparently, because we have dozens of questions about the disposal of dead bodies, such as, wouldn't it be better to be buried vertically instead of horizontally? How easy is it to be buried at sea? And which is better for the environment, to be buried or cremated? But to discuss the overall question, what is the most environmentally friendly way to dispose of a dead body, we have in the studio Andrew Carr, a compost specialist, Professor Richard Lacey from the Department of Microbiology at Leeds University, and Dave Adams of the Institute of Burial and Crematorium Administration. Now, if I come to you, first of all, Andrew Carr, and I've introduced you as a compost specialist, is that how you see the disposal of human remains, turning us into compost?
Everything, all organic matter ought to be composted and put back into the land.
Yes. But isn't that how natural burial works? We bury our body in a graveyard or cemetery, and eventually the worms eat us and it goes back into the soil.
Yes, eventually. That's a very long process, and it's anaerobic. It doesn't have oxygen.
Yes.
I recommend, if you compost things, it's not smelly, it's much quicker, and and you can grow more vegetation in the result.
So what are you suggesting? We do this in our own back garden? If your nearest and dearest dies, you shove them on the compost heap, and then you get a better sort of display of roses at the end of the...
That, I think, would be a disrespectful way of doing it.
Yes.
I would send it down to not the crematorium, but the compostorium.
Yes.
Which is a public place for doing it.
Yeah, what happens? What happens to our body there?
Well, do you want the grisly details?
I think so, yes. I think we've got to get our head round this.
Well, first of all, I think it needs to be disemboweled because of the danger of pathogens getting into the system.
Right.
I put that in a methane digester.
Yes.
Cook the body in a sort of autoclave, a pressure cooker. And then eventually it's boiled down into a sort of soup and ground up and spread in straw and stuff like that, vegetable waste.
Yeah.
And you turn it like an ordinary compost heap.
Yes.
And at the end of 12 weeks, a decent time for mourning, I think you would get a friable compost to put in a memorial garden, which would be a very nice place.
So we're not getting any real practical benefit out of this, we're just getting a better sort of memorial display.
Very practical, very practical.
Yeah.
A nice family garden, the family tree. Compost the family tree, why not?
That's fair enough. Well, now, leaving aside the outlandish quality of that, as a scientist, Professor Lacey, would you regard that as a sensible way of disposing of human remains?
That's crazy. And embarrassing.
Yes.
And I don't think it does enough respect for the dead.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be serious for a second. The human body often dies from infections.
Yes.
It's the way that most people die, in fact. And the infection's everywhere. It's in the blood.
Yeah.
You can't just take bits of organs out and hope that you're making it safe. And we've learnt the hard way over the years. We do two things. We either incinerate or we bury deeply. Yeah. And I'm happy with both those. Yeah. I'm comfortable with those. This is absolutely crazy. I don't think it's serious. I mean, I don't think this is worthy of television time, to be honest.
Oh, right. Well, that's kicking us where it hurts already. But Dave Adams, now what do you represent? This body of body disposal, burial, crematorium administration. You represent the sort of conventional way of doing things.
Yeah, I would agree with what's been said there, that composting is overlooking the emotional needs of the relatives.
Yes.
It's not... We don't cater really for the deceased person. We cater for the relatives.
Yes.
So we design the systems to meet the needs of people who are very distressed.
But somebody might have said that when, I don't know when crematoria first came into being in this country, they might have said, oh, hang on, we've been burying people in the ground for centuries, and now you're proposing that we sort of turn our loved one into smoke. They might well have said the same thing then. This isn't respectful, but it's now regarded as a sort of proper way to do things.
Well, when you've cremated a body, you're basically breaking it down into its component elements.
Yes.
The body is 80% water, so you're giving that off as water vapour. Yeah. You're breaking the rest of the body then down into its constituent elements. So it's, in effect, it's a natural process.
Yes.
And it's producing a perfectly safe end product.
And when you get the ashes, if you collect them from a crematorium, do you get only the ashes of your loved one, or is it also a mixture of everybody who's been there that day?
Every single cremation is separate from the next one. There is a code of cremation practice which was introduced by an organisation called the Federation of British Cremation Authorities, who actually monitor and police crematoria to make sure they adhere to this code of practice. Cremators are designed so that they will only accommodate one coffin.
Yes.
And the remains that you get at the end are from that one person.
But it does give off a certain amount of smoke, and we were trying to find the most environmentally friendly one. So, Andrew Carr, you took a bit of a knocking there from Richard Lacey, but how do you regard it environmentally, a cremation? Are you worried about the smoke?
Yes, I'm worried about the pollution, obviously.
Yeah. But no?
I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, the government themselves, when they introduced the Environmental Protection Act in 1990, which came into effect in 91, actually recognised that crematoria were a very minor pollutant and put them into... There were two categories, major pollutants and minor pollutants. And the crematoria were put into that category.
So nothing like compared to power stations, right?
Nothing like power stations, nothing like incinerators, where vast amounts of waste products are put in and produce quite dangerous which is emissions.
Well, now, just see, your suggestion of composting was rather poo-pooed, if that's the right expression, by the professor, saying it wasn't even a sensible suggestion. I mean, are you making it as a serious suggestion, or is it just a bit
Yes,
of a laugh?
I am, because most of the life on the planet happens in a very short depth of soil. And to create life from death, and that's a very lively thing to do. When you burn it, it's just... Now, if you get a friable compost, which is safe, it's a safe product.
You don't know it's safe.
You have to make tests.
You don't know.
You have to make tests.
You haven't done any tests. It's pure speculation and dangerous speculation. Yeah. Can I suggest that the answer to both these problems is very simple, that we bury people in a secular way, usually, 6 feet under the ground, but don't litter it with clutter. So it can't be used.
So you don't have headstones?
No, we plant trees.
Yes.
And the tree roots will use the decaying body. And if people want to have plaques on the trees, then the person can be remembered. You will then have the use of the body, the humus, and it'll be safe, and everyone will be happy.
Well, I agree with that. I think it's almost sensible, a very sensible suggestion. We could create whole forests again in the country, which are just there for dead people's forests, each tree named in the memory of
But not in
one.
compost heaps.
Not in compost heap. We're ruling out your compost heap.
It's got to be 6 foot down to be
6 foot under, and then the tree can extract all the goodness from the dead body.
I think that's... I don't. Well, I don't think it's
my idea, basically.
It's your
But I think
my idea. It doesn't sound your idea.
I don't want to intrude on a private argument. I don't think you can claim your idea, the idea of burying people 6 foot under.
Bring trees and plaques.
Yes, trees and plaques. Well, I think
and you won't use any energy.
Wrong with that. I think there's
we're all
wrong with that.
But we still keep you in work, because you can still drive the people there. We have the ceremonial little thing. You're happy because it eventually turns into a tree, turns into leaves, turns into compost. You're happy because there's no pollution, there's no disease being spread on, and I'm happy because I like trees. So thank you very much. We've agreed on that. Andrew Carr, Professor Richard Dacey, and Dave Adams.
Why is it that when you're stroking a cat, they always show their bottoms?
Right. Any other ones like that? Or different from that?
What's the origin of the phrase, Lloyd George knew my father?
Right.
Why don't raindrops hurt?
Well, that's a good question, because they're kind, I think, is the answer, but...
Why is New York called the Big Apple?
The Big Apple? I don't know.
Why do cats have 9 lives, and where does it originate from?
I don't know, and I don't know, I think it's the...
Why do men have nipples?
That's an excellent question. Any more questions on that sort of front? If you have a query you'd like us to deal with, you could try your luck by writing to Notes and Queries, room 4008, BBC Television Centre, Wood Lane, London, W12 7RJ.